Amen. So we were in Revelation 6:13, and the reason we went to Revelation 6:13 is because in Mark 13, verse 24 and 25, I think, 24 and 25, it splits up the sun, moon, stars, and the heaven shaking into two verses. The sun and the moon in one verse, and the stars and the heaven in another verse. So I asked, why would they do that? And it seems from the answers that we came up with is that the sun and the moon are connected. We know that if the sun stops shining, the moon will not reflect any light, so it will become dark. And then the stars would fall. And why would the stars fall? Because the heavens had been shaken. So then we went to Revelation 6:13, and just make sure I'm not misreading something when I say that. Verse 12 says the sun and the moon, but when a moon is being spoken of here, it's red as blood, which is an additional piece of information. Then 13, it says the stars of heaven fell upon the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when it is shaken by a mighty wind. And that word untimely figs means green figs, or things that are happening out of this season when they shouldn't really be happening. So I went to a parallel passage in Isaiah 28 because I want us to see how a similar concept is being brought to view here. It's not exactly the same. We're going to see that it's not the same. There's some other truths to be drawn out, but it has very similar characteristics. It talks about hasty fruit, which sounds very much like untimely figs, because it says before the summer. And I think in Revelation, does it say the same? No, it just says untimely. But if you look at the definition, it means green figs before harvest, and harvest is normally considered to be summer. So we've done that. And the other reason I wanted to go to Isaiah 28 verse 4, besides looking at that, is now that we're here, let's just see how we study a verse. Seemed to me a good example of that. So I asked you to paraphrase it in your own words, and we saw that it's actually not easy to do that. The temptation is always there to bring in other verses and to start making application long before we actually just try and see what the verse itself says. So when you go to revised versions and we criticize them a lot, two reasons. First of all, they're not accurate to the text, and then we complain that the original texts are not kosher. My understanding is that those original manuscripts, any kind of error that's in them there isn't that much of it. You know, like 99% of those manuscripts are pretty much the same as the manuscripts that are being used to create the King James Version. So that's one thing. The other thing is that because they're paraphrases, people say they're not accurate. And you could see the way we were approaching those verses, we're not doing it in an accurate way either. So if we had gone to Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and we'd looked at the daily, I wonder if we'd put the words sacrifice in there as well, just like they did, because it sounds right, which is very similar to the way we were approaching verse 4, because we have this preconceived idea. So anyway, we worked our way through that, and now we're trying to break down the verse and see how we would approach the verse. We've seen that there's the word as. The other version said likewise. So we know that this is a parable. Something is being compared to something else. It's not really quite a parable in its strictest sense, because in a parable you compare the natural with the spiritual. So we'd have to work that out to see if it really is an accurate parable. But it's certainly repeat and enlarge. And what I'm suggesting is that the first part of the passage, where it talks about the head of the fat valley shall be as a fading flower, it's this head garland that they used to wear. I'm not sure if it's just restricted to women. You can go and do some research on that. But when they used to have their parties, their revellings, they all used to dress really nicely for the event. And part of the attire would be these beautiful head garlands that they'd wear. And that's what's being portrayed here, that the head of the garland, this primary most beautiful flower that you choose, is already fading. We've discussed that a flower begins to fade after it's reached maturity. It begins to grow, blossom, and is perfect at the stage where it's ready to be harvested. And if you leave it there, it will begin to fade, it will begin to die. Even if you give it sunshine and water and nurture it, it will still die. Which is unlike wheat. Wheat is different. Once it reaches maturity, it will stay fixed at that mature stage and it doesn't begin to fade. So there's some subtle differences between the two. So I'm saying, why was it fading? I'm suggesting that it's a symbol of God's mercy. He had been patiently waiting for Ephraim, the Samaritans, to get their lives in order, to get ready to go back to God, and he was waiting and waiting, and it's way past punishment time. And so now he's going to begin to punish them. But when he begins to punish them, what does it look like? It looks like hasty fruit. So we looked at the word hasty fruit, and is supplied as the hasty fruit. What did we say that meant?
First fruit.
Means first fruit. So we know that when we start thinking about first fruits, we're now talking about harvest coming in two stages. The first fruit and then the main harvest. So if we can start conceptualizing this in this passage, we've already known that verse 1 is Ephraim and verse 14 is Jerusalem. So this is Ephraim and Judah. We know that there's a transition verse somewhere between verse 1 and verse 14. Maybe verse 14 that's the transition verse, but we'd have to find a transition. But they're talking about two groups of people. Now, I think in the sermon, Sister Emma took us to verse 17, and spoke about what judgment is, spoke about what the plummet is. So in verse 17, I'm going to read the second part of the verse. And the hail shall sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters shall overflow the hiding place. So it talks about three things: hail, water, and overflowing. You can see that? So all I want to do is pick up hail and overflowing and the water. And where is that introduced in Isaiah 28? Don't shout out. Don't shout out, my brother.
Come again.
Sorry?
The question.
My question is, verse 17, it says hail, water, and overflow. And who's that going to happen to?
It's going to happen to Jerusalem.
It's going to happen to Jerusalem. We'll call it Judah. So, if we had read the verses, and most people have read Isaiah 28, I'm saying those three symbols are spoken about elsewhere in the chapter. Do you know which verse it is? No? So it's in verse 2. So if you read verse 2, it doesn't say water, it says flood, it says storm. It's slightly different language, but you definitely have the hail and the overflow. So you can see the waters there as well. Now, when it speaks about that in verse 2, who's it referring to there? This is Ephraim. So you can see that Ephraim and Judah are going to receive the same punishment. We can see that? So, when you come back to verse 4, Samaria, which is the head of this fat valley, this fertile field, which is already past harvest time. This is now what? When it says, as the hasty fruit before summer. What is this? Hasty fruit means? So this is the first fruit. So if Samaria or Ephraim is the first fruit, before summer, what must the main fruit be? This is Judah or Jerusalem. So, are we okay with that application? Yeah? So, the hasty fruit before summer is the destruction of Ephraim as it comes to what? Maturity. In fact, it's past maturity because it's a fading flower. So Ephraim is the first fruit, it's already mature and it's going to be harvested before the main harvest, which comes in the summertime. And then it says, which when he that looketh upon it seeth it while it is yet in his hand, he eateth it up. So someone's going to look at this fruit and what are they going to see? That it's in what condition? That they're going to see that it's ripe, and when it's ripe they'll pluck it because it's the first fruit. It's supposed to be plucked, so they're going to pluck it, and when they pluck it they're not going to wait for some future time. They're going to eat it straight away, which means it's going to get destroyed immediately. It's going to get destroyed before the summer. So you see the destruction of God's people in the two steps, Ephraim, Judah, happening in two steps. One person's going to be eaten straight away, and the other one's going to be eaten at the main harvest, which would be summer. So who is the he that's being brought to view in the verse? So this is the Assyrians. The Assyrians are the he who are going to be doing this work. If you go to verse 2, what is he described as here? A mighty and strong one. So it says the Lord hath a mighty and strong one. So when it says the Lord hath, what does that mean, Brother William? The Lord hath.
Yes.
Yeah, don't mean that. Don't re-put it into. I want an application. What does it mean? The Lord hath. What's that saying to us?
He's thinking as that the Lord is already having someone. Yeah.
Okay, so if the Lord has someone, the someone works for whom? For the Lord. This is one of the Lord's workers, one of his servants. So this mighty one, the Assyrians, are the servants of the Lord. I want us to remember that the Assyrians are the king of the north, and the king of the north don't work for God. They work for Satan. They're Satan's agents. So you have this dichotomy, this dilemma, that at one level they work for God, and for another level they're agents of Satan. So I don't know if you remember Sister Tessie's presentations, when I think in one of the very earliest presentations she makes this point. She makes the point that whilst they can be considered to be servants of God, they're actually workers for Satan. So you need to hold two perspectives. They're looking at the same history in two different ways. Yeah? So, in 28:4, this fruit, is it ripe fruit? Yes. Is it time to harvest that fruit? Yes. So that's a legitimate use of this fruit, the first fruit. Now, if I use the word harbinger, or token, or sign, like we were doing in Matthew, Mark and Luke, and also in Revelation 6, we understood how we were using that. Can we use that same concept, harbinger, token, sign, here? Does Samaria become a sign or a token of what's about to happen to Judah?
Yes.
So we can still use that concept, but when it comes to Ephraim, is it premature? Is it green figs? Is it before the time? It's not. It's already ripe. So we can use this word of token or symbol both when something is not ready, but also when something is ready. But there are two different models here. Because in Matthew and in the Gospel, in the three Gospels and Revelation, what is the thing that we're supposed to be looking for? What is the thing? If we could say the harvest, the second advent, the end of the world, when shall be thy coming? So that's what we're looking at. And there's only one thing, which is the summer or the harvest. And what we want to ask is, what are we asking? We're looking for the sign or the token. So the sign or the token is what? According to Revelation 6. It's the unripe figs. So if there wasn't an unripe fig, we wouldn't have a sign. That's not quite correct. Because if there were unripe figs, that wouldn't teach us anything, because the figs would stay on the tree. What gives us the ability to know that something's happening? It's not so much the unripe figs, it's what? It's the shaking of the fig tree. And what causes the shaking of a fig tree? The wind. So it's the wind that is the sign that the second coming's about to happen. We're okay with that. When the wind blows, it has an effect, and the effect that it has is that it shakes the fig tree, and you get these premature figs. So in the context of Revelation 6, what are the premature figs? In Revelation 6, what are the premature figs? The shakings of the nature of the powers of Europe. So let's see what it says. And as the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as, what does even as mean? Comparison. So it's a parable. Even as the fig tree casteth her untimely figs. So we'll put it here. It's stars equals figs. So the stars equal the figs. So if we apply that back into Matthew, Mark or Luke, when the stars shall fall, it's the figs falling. Now, you can see the problem that you're going to start getting into, because what produces the falling of the figs? The winds, and the winds produce the falling of the figs, but they produce the falling of the stars. And if the stars were falling, what was being shaken? Heavens. So can you see how you can get into a big mess if you don't have someone guiding or directing you? Or if you don't study carefully. Now it's really easy for us to look back at this and work it all out. And we have 1833, 1840, we have all of these dates, because all we're doing now is we've got all these pieces and we're just putting them together and working out a timeline. But if you were doing this from scratch, it'd be really difficult to work this out. We can see that? So if you go back to the history of 1848, not specifically, but in the context of 1844 to 1850, what's going on in that history, 44 to 50, in the Advent movement? Sorry?
It's an internal work.
There's an internal work, and what does that internal work look like, my brother? What does it look like? What are they doing? Okay, they're preparing a bit more detail.
They're examining and coming to a strong certainty of the messages.
A strong what?
Certainty.
Oh, certainty. Sorry, yes. Sorry, it's me. It's not you. So they're coming to a strong certainty. They were certain before. In 1798 to 1844, they were pretty certain of things, but they'd got some things wrong. Higher medicine stands up on the 23rd of October and says, now I understand the sanctuary issue. So they're going to review all of their material. And what's the problem when they're reviewing all the material? Everyone's got his own idea. And so they've got 5 different views, and one of them is correct. Who knows which one is correct? No one. So Ellen White's going to come and do what? She's going to go in vision, and she's going to select which one is the right one. Now, let me back out of that, because I've already put something into your minds which may or may not be correct. So we've got all of these views, we've got the 5 views, and then Ellen White says. So my question is, are all the 5 views wrong? And then Ellen White tells you what the right view is, the 6th view, or does Ellen White pick one of the 5 and says that's the right view? How do we understand that history? What's your perspective of it? Is everybody wrong and she says, no, I'll tell you what these verses mean? Or does she say, yep, Brother X was correct, even though she may not express it that way, that's the correct view? The second one, which is everyone's wrong and she comes with the right one. Oh, the other one, they've got 5 views, one of them is the correct one and she's going to point to which is the right one.
Because she stated in her writing that the Lord would give them the correct reading of the scripture.
Okay, when she said the Lord will give them the correct reading of the scripture, I think she's talking about herself, not talking about them.
No, because she said they would sit and study together, but then when there's confusion about the understanding of the scripture, she will go into vision, and then the Lord will give her the correct reading.
Yeah, so that's what I just said. The Lord will give her the correct reading. So my question is her correct reading of the scripture that the Lord's going to give her, is she's going to say, yep, it's this one here, the one that brother had already worked out, or is it a brand new one?
She wouldn't say it, but they will see that brother so-and-so maybe is correct, or is correct partly.
Okay, anyone else?
If I remember, there are 2 instances. There is a time they will sit to study, you come up with a conclusion, and should be taken in vision and be shown that what you have come up with is correct. But there are instances, she says, when you come to a passage of scripture that was difficult for us to understand, I'll be taken in vision and it was explained to us. So there are 2 different instances. So one, there is an instance where what they've studied and come up with is confirmed, but another one, they studied something and it was difficult. They could not agree, they could not understand. She's taken in vision and it is explained to her.
Okay, so either they don't understand or they don't agree. Which one you want to go for? Because if they don't agree, that means your position is right and mine is wrong and we can't agree, and she's going to sort the agreement out, or none of us understand what that verse means.
There is somewhere she says, when they will come to passages of scripture that were difficult to be understood. You can find that.
Okay. Anyone else? No comments? Okay, so the only reason I mentioned all of that history is because without some kind of guidance, it's really hard to come to some kind of conclusion. And so most of these things have already been straightened out for us, and all we're doing is now making sure that our version of events is correct. The reason why it's not easy is because when Ellen White talks about a particular Bible verse, what does she do? And she does this a lot. She takes a Bible verse and she applies it 2, 3, 4 different ways. So, according to the spirit of prophecy, what is a tear? According to the spirit of prophecy, what is a tear?
An embodiment of this
Embodiment of evil, is that what you said?
embodiment of
The embodiment of evil. So what does that mean? Like a really bad person? A really bad person? What does the embodiment of evil mean?
what it says is somebody who is embodied with error. So he has these false principles and erroneous views, the way I understand it.
Anyone else?
I've read somewhere she speaks about it's in the book Christ of the Lessons. She's going to approach it from a moral perspective and say they are defective members in the church.
So they're defective members in the church, people who don't keep all the moral rules. So you've got people who don't keep the moral rules, people who are just full of evil.
In the same book, First Object Lesson, page 70, she talks how the wheat and tares are produced in the church, and they are produced by truth. One is produced by accepting truth. The other one is produced by accepting false doctrines.
So that they accept false doctrines. Anyone else?
There is somewhere I should tell you that we'll be speaking about the children, the parents are not responsible watching evil things, and she'll say that the parents are like the children, they put you in the stairs and hold their money.
So she'll talk about, they don't have movies in those days, but a movie or a book, and she says the parents are putting tares into their brains. So she's got many different ways to think about tares, and that's the problem with coming into some of these passages, because the way Ellen White applies them isn't always the way that we would apply them. And then you have to ask yourself which application is the correct one. So hopefully we can see this. If we weren't careful, we'd be saying that the shaking of the earth is the shaking of the heavens. Do we believe that? We've already shown that it's really not that way. In fact, we have a Spirit of Prophecy quote that says it's not. But the way all of these verses go, you'd be led to that conclusion. Okay, so let's just tidy up that short section. We went to Mark 24 and 25, the verses, and we split them and we said the sun and the moon are connected and the stars falling are connected to the heavens. We could see why that would be. We went to Revelation 6 and we saw that the shaking of the stars or the falling of the stars was produced by a mighty wind or the shaking of the heavens. We saw that. We saw that this was not the end, or what we might call the harvest, but this was a sign that the harvest was near. And in that context, it's not first fruits. Then we went to Isaiah 28. And in Isaiah 28, we saw that we have another sign that the main harvest is about to come. And in that context, it is the first fruits. It's not untimely figs. It's figs that are fully mature and ripe. But both serve as a harbinger or an earnest. Now, Luke 21 then introduces a new concept which causes us some problems, because in verses 25 and 26 it adds some information that's not in Mark and it's not in Matthew, and the information that's there is about what's going on in the earth, and that's what's being shown here. So if you go to Matthew or Mark, it just says sun, moon, separate, the stars fall and the heavens shake. And if that's all we had, I think we'd use Revelation 6 and proof text that the shaking of the heavens was 1833. Would that be a reasonable assumption to make? Yeah? We'd all agree with that? Then you have Luke 21 to deal with. So Luke 21 inserts the subject of the earth before you get between the sun, moon and stars and the powers of heaven. So I want to say that in another way. You have the stars and you have the heavens shaking, and you have the stars falling. We would call this, I would call this cause and effect. And I'd base that, I could prove that's correct from where? How could I prove that that's correct? You shake the heavens, the stars will fall. Revelation 6. If you proof text that, and you'd come to the wrong answer. Proof texting, you have to be really careful about. We talk often about we're proof texters because that's the right methodology, and if you use the historical or grammatical methodologies, it's some kind of sinful, evil thing that the Catholics gave us. It's not that straightforward. Often you'll hear teachers contrast the two and say, we would never do the historical grammatical methodology because it's evil. But I would argue, when you start talking about contextual studying, what does that mean? Because I asked you in Isaiah 28, verse 4, who was the he? And everyone said, well, not everyone, but everyone said it's the Assyrians. And who's the mighty one? The Assyrians. But if you went to if you watched the presentation on Isaiah 28, we wouldn't say that. Who would the he be? So it's the papacy, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, we'd immediately bring it down to the end of the world and not understand what the history was. So, in verse 4, the he is the Assyrians, which is verse 2, the mighty one. In verse 17, who is it? 28:17, who is it there? It's Babylon. It's switched. I don't know if we. I think we can. It's fair to say we switched empires. We've gone from the Assyrians to the Babylonians, which means we've gone forward. How many years? About. We're in 723. We're going to go to which year?
676.
6. We're not going to go to 677. We're going to go to 606 or 586, where Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, the sanctuary is going to be destroyed. You're about 150 years forward. So if you don't understand the history, you're going to end up making mistakes when you make an application. I don't know if you want to call that the historical methodology. Then I asked you, let's start looking at the Greek and Hebrew. Let's start seeing the structure of these verses. And people are telling me about what a colon means, or semicolon, or a full stop. That all sounds like grammar. So is that the grammatical method that we're all against? So I'm not saying that it's all benign, the historical methodology and the grammatical methodology, but we have to be really careful about how we approach this problem and how we teach it as well, because you can end up looking like a real fool if you say something silly. Give you one example. So, if you go to the church and the church hates one doctrine the most above all other doctrines that we teach, what's that? 25-20. And we're going to go into, where are we going to go to talk about the 25-20? We're going to go to Leviticus 26. And we're going to say 7 times. And 7 times means what? I'll give you a choice, a multiple choice. Duration, intensity. This is us, and that's them. Those apostate SDA theologians who don't know anything because they use the grammatical methodology. So they're going to go back and say, 2,000 years ago, Hebrew was not the Hebrew that we understand, and you need to go back and check everything, and it's all about 7 times is about what? Intensity. And we say, you don't know what you're talking about. Don't use this grammatical stuff on us. We're not going to accept that. We know its duration because it's 7 times, and we don't care about if the word times is there or not. It's irrelevant because it's not there, is it? The word times, it's not in the original. It just says 7 Sheba, or some variation of Sheba. So we say no, it's duration. How do we know it's duration? Who told us it's duration? Miller. Who said proof text? What are you going to proof text it against? Tell me your proof text. Where are you going to proof text it?
Israel in Chronicles.
Sorry?
In Chronicles.
Give me the verse. Because you might be right. If you tell me it's proof text, then I'll agree with that. So someone said Miller, and you're going to proof text it. First or second?
Second.
So 2 Chronicles. Do you want us to help you, or
Yes, someone can help you.
we don't know what you're looking for?
Yeah, 17, 36, 21. 36, 21.
So you tell me how you've proof text from Leviticus 26 to 2 Chronicles 36, 21.
Someone says to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth.
I've got the word. We've all got the verse in front of us. You tell us what you're proof texting.
The words Sabbath, sabbatical years.
You've proof text the word Sabbath.
Because the land was supposed to enjoy her Sabbath.
Yeah, but that's not proof texting in its proper way, is it?
Which verse in Leviticus 26?
Which was that word should appear in the 26.
We usually start from the 26, but it starts from chapter 25, where it talks about the Sabbath.
Okay. So you tell me then, you agree with duration. You think that 7 times is duration.
Yeah.
Tell me how long it is.
17, 360.
Is that what you said? So, what's that got to do with 2 Chronicles 36?
Because in the it talks about the Sabbath, the land to have a rest. But then here, I just found the word Sabbath in this text.
Yeah, that's chapter 25. We're in chapter 26, which is the punishment for not doing chapter 25.
This time to Leviticus 26, verse 33 and 34.
No, yeah, but verse 34, I know the connection between verse 34 and verse 21 here, but you told me 7 times is 2,500 years. So you tell me what 2,500 years has got to do with 70 years of captivity.
Scattering.
For how long?
They were scattered to 70.
So what's the 2,500 years got to do with anything? That's my question. Okay, so I'll make it easier, and I'll answer my own question. Nothing, because you're not going to answer. You're just going to keep quiet. So, our argument has been these people are using grammar or whatever they're using, and they're wrong and we're right. Pretty much. So if I were to ask you, Brother William, Leviticus 26, 7 times, is it duration or intensity?
We see its duration.
What are you saying? You're part of the we. Duration.
Yeah?
Yeah?
I believe it's duration.
Okay. So when you said we, you and some other brethren. So let's see if you've got any compatriots. Just duration or intensity. I'm just going to call these A or B, so you do it quickly. A or B? A. So there's we. A. B. Look at that, see? You're not together. Sorry? A. B. Both. Both. Brother Wilson? Both. B. Both. Sister Emma? A. Okay, so we've got a mixed multitude. Some people said A. Put your hands up if it's B. Just B on its own. Just B on its own. Okay, so about a third of the class. Just A on its own. About the same number. And A and B together. Okay, about the same. So it's about the same. A third A, a third B, and a third all together. So it's not like I've got the casting vote. It doesn't work that way because we're all brethren. But I think it's B. I think the church, these theologians are correct, and I think the way we've done it is wrong. And I think you all believe that as well. So, if you go, we're not going to turn there. If you go to verse 18, it's 18, 21, 24, and 28. If you go to verse 18, Actually, we will turn there because I want to make a point. I think it's not even 18. Which verse you telling me? It's verse 18, yeah. And it begins by saying, if ye will not yet for all this hearken unto me. Who was one of the A people? Sister Emma was. Sister Emma, tell us what the first part of the verse says. 18, part A, up to the comma, me.
After all this, you won't listen to me.
After all this, if you won't listen to me. Is that reasonable? Anyone else want to give a first part of the verse?
It means that after all this, you don't obey me.
After all this, if you won't obey me. Okay? So, everyone has kept...
Yeah, look at it. Seems like there is a punishment which was given, and if people are not going to take it to that punishment, it's going to be another thing.
So, both people who paraphrased kept the word this, because it's not easy to swap the word this out and use something else. So, my question would be, what is the this? And my brother says, the this is something else has happened, and he says, if that didn't do something for you, I'm going to give you something else. So if we were going to look at what the this was, we'd have to go in the verses before, and we could see what the verses before, what the this is. And what is the this? Brother Wilson, what is the this? Don't read the verse, don't even tell us what verse it is. Tell us what the this was. Yeah, can you tell? I know it's the previous verses. Can you tell us what it is? One word or a couple of words? You don't even have to pick out the word from the Bible. Tell us what you think that this is.
Not to say, but the previous verse that the judgment of God.
Okay, I don't want that. I want a singular word or a little concept. As teachers, what we need to be able to do is amass, which means collect, a lot of information. And this is detailed information that you need to have. And then the sign of a good teacher is they get all this complexity and they explain it in what kind of a way? In a very simple way. Now, you might go to a college or a school and they said, we've got a teacher that studies from Oxford or Cambridge. And you think, this must be a really good school then. And it may not be. You could get a teacher who went to a really bad college, no reputation, but they would be a very good teacher because they can explain complex material in a very simple way. So it's not about where you train from, it's about your ability to distill information and explain it in a really good way. So just because you come to one of the top schools, like this one, I don't mean this particular one, I mean the School of the Prophets generally in this movement, whatever school you go to, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good teacher. So the skill of a good teacher, for me, means getting difficult ideas and explaining it to, I'll give a silly example, a sister who's got a baby that's crying in her arms and she wants to learn, but there's all this noise going on, and if you start giving some complex answers, she's just never going to get it in that little situation. And what you have to do is help her. You could go to lots of different scenarios. You need to be able to understand and explain things in a simple way. Then when they get that, then you go to the next level, then the next level, and then you bring them up so that they become a competent teacher like you, and they can understand all the difficulties and the complexities. But the first place you start is you must be able to explain things simply. So that's why I'm forcing you now to say, tell me what the this is, because I know it's the verses before. And if I said, okay, let's read the verses before and work it through together, that's how we would do it a few stages down the road. But at its most simple level, I want us to understand what the concept is of the this. And if you picked it up, then you'd be able to understand whether the 7 times is duration or intensity. It's going to help you to work that out. And not only that, if you can work out what the this is, you can then contextualize or historicize what that thing is. And then you begin to see the relationship of verses. Did that make sense? Of why we want to do that? And it's not that easy to be able to get a lot of material and to develop models in your mind that you can say things in a really simple fashion which are accurate and true, because that becomes really difficult. It becomes difficult to get a complex thing and distill it into a very small idea or concept while still the thing has integrity. And the person who's the expert at doing that is Jesus. Jesus has the ability to take complex spiritual things and distill them into a really simple model. And we call that parables. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. God's raised up this movement. He's raised us up as teachers so we can look at all the noise in the world, and we can know when a group of people were born or came to adulthood at a certain time in history, then we can start marking down the events that bring us to the Sunday law. And there's so many things happening in the world, someone has to distill all of that and come up with some simple answers, like 1989 and 9/11. Now, the more you look at those two waymarks, those two histories, the more you see it's not that simple. The King of the South isn't the Soviet Union. One problem. The Soviet Union doesn't fall in 1989. Another problem. What is a gate in Germany got to do with end time prophecy? Another problem. You have all of these problems which can confuse people. So what we try to do is say, don't worry about any of that. It's just a simple story about the King of the North, King of the South, and it comes to a climax in 1989. We simplify and distill it. Then if someone's not happy, then we take them to a next level, and a next, and a next, until we get to the place where we come to the limit of our understanding. But we need to be able to simplify things so that people can understand what we're doing. And we've been very good at that in the past, and we've done that for the last 29 years. So all of us have read the Time of the End magazine, and it really does it in a simple way. Takes you through these 6 verses in a simplistic fashion. The more you look at those verses, the more you realize actually it's not that straightforward. Then you begin to realize maybe we said things wrong in our oversimplification. But that work served to bring all of us into this movement. It created this movement. So you know the methodology works. So coming back, what is the this? My brother, what is this? Okay, are we all okay with that answer?
Yes.
This is punishment. So I'm suggesting, my brother's suggesting, that he's suggesting, I'm going to go with that. I like that answer. If this, let me retake the this out. If the punishment you've already experienced is not enough, what am I going to do? I'm going to add more. So for all of those people who wanted to do the A version, which is duration, tell me where you see duration in that story. Because what we've done now, we've developed a storyline. We've said the punishment, I'm going to put in parentheses, before, which means in the past. And just because you put in the past, it doesn't mean duration. Duration doesn't just mean things happen in some kind of historical setting. So the punishment I gave you before or in the past, if that's not enough, then I'm going to give you more punishment. Are we okay with that? And then if you go to verse 21, it says, and if you walk contrary unto me and will not hearken unto me, I will bring more punishment upon you. We okay with that? Verse 21, more. So if this is not enough, then I'll bring you this one. And if this is not enough, I'll bring you more. A reasonable reading of this passage, a reasonable reading, sounds to me like intensity, not duration. Things are going from bad to worse. And I don't know if I use the word ratchet. If you ratchet something up, it means it's getting tighter and tighter. It's getting worse and worse. So I think there's a lot of truth about making this intensity. So my brother took us to 2 Chronicles 36:21. And 2 Chronicles 36:21 is a 70-year captivity which happened thousands of years ago. Do you agree with that? He took us there because of verse 34 in Leviticus 26. Leviticus 26 verse 34 is the end result of what?
Not being reformed by this.
It's the end result of verse 28. So when you get to verse 28, and when I've broken the staff of your bread, 28, then will I walk contrary unto you, and unto you also in fury, and even I will chastise you 7 times more. Oh, did I do something wrong?
7 kings.
Sorry, I'll read that again. Then I will walk contrary unto you, also in fury, and even I will chastise you 7 times for your sins. So, by the time you get to verse 28, that chastisement is going to then be described and explained, and it looks like verse 34, which is 70 years captivity, which is why he went to Leviticus 36. What history is that? This is the history of Zedekiah. We're all familiar with that. So you already know this is the history of Judah, that it's ending in the history of Judah. If it ends in the history of Judah, where did it begin? So I think you can develop a very good argument when you go to verse 18 and you start looking at what this punishment was before. There's a before punishment and now there's an after punishment. Are we okay with that? Now, if you're going to do this simply, what would you say the before punishment was? Sorry? The time period of the judges. So, if you do this simply, you'd say, this is judges, and this is kings. And most people will say, that looks great. That makes sense. I get it. That's the simple answer. And you say, good. Now you can understand why its intensity. Because then we're going to say, well, what king is this? We're going to say Manasseh, Kim, Kin, and Zedekiah. So we'll make that argument. And people will say, okay, that looks good. Then they'll think about it a bit more. And they'll say, hold on a minute. If this was judges and this is kings, there's been a lot of kings in between here, like 13 kings, that kind of number. How come you picked Manasseh? Why is there this big gap here? And we'll say, I'm glad you asked that question. Because the answer is, my brother, okay, so some of us don't know, which is fine. So we say, we don't know. We just give you the simple answers first. So if you give people the simple answers, the most obvious ones, it's the best way to approach it. Then someone says, well, how come there's a big gap? And you say, I'm glad you asked, I don't know, I'll find out. We can do that. So then we ask somebody, why? And the simple answer, we'll give a simple answer, not a complex answer, is what? Who would be able to give an answer for that?
The answer that you can give is that is where the description of the punishment the first 7 times out in the time Manasseh, in which the pride of the power was taken.
I'm not asking that question. What I'm asking is, why is there a big gap? Because what you've done is you've said, I'm going to tell you what this verse means, and you're applying it to Manasseh. I'm saying you could apply it to lots of kings. You could apply it to Solomon. I'm sure you could. It wouldn't be difficult to apply it to a famous king that has similar characteristics, or to Rehoboam or Jeroboam or someone. Anyone?
Because of the long suffering of God.
There you go. I like that answer. Because of the long suffering of God. What do we call the long suffering of God? Mercy, or, because we're into prophecy, probationary time. So we'd say, oh, the reason is because God's going to give you probationary time. And they say, well, okay, I accept probationary time, and then give me a bit more proof for this, about this probationary time. Prove it that it's probationary time. And we're going to now say probationary time equals what? 490 years. So this is the simple answer, because then we'd have to show them how 490 years works. Then we'd have to get some chronology out, and it's a bit complex, it's a bit messy. But can you see how we could give the answers very simply and then progressively more complex? And it challenges us. Now, in a class of this size, probably at least half of us wouldn't have known the 490. Some of us would have known God's mercy. Some of us would have translated God's mercy in probationary time. And then even if we knew 490 was probationary time, maybe we don't know where to start and where to end. But all of that is just information. You can learn that in a couple of minutes if you've got a good memory. You might not be able to prove it, but you can learn it. So someone in this class could tell us where the 490 begins. They could tell us when the 490 ends. So you can see how we've looked at this progressively. This is a sign of a good teacher, which all of us are aspiring to become. Not so that we can look good, it's so that we can serve properly. And remember, we're approaching people who are later seen and is spiritually dead. So for us to be able to bring them up or raise them up out of death, we have to do this progressively. Where did we read about progressiveness? From Loughborough's work. It started off cold, dead, if you like, and then it grows, the light gets brighter and brighter. So we have to do the same. That's how we all learn. We learned from the Time of the End magazine, and now we're taking things that if we put the Time of the End magazine, rewrote it'd have to be a big book because of all the details that we know. And if we did that, we'd wreck God's plan, wouldn't we? We'd destroy his plan. Because his plan is to teach simply first and then become more complex. So can we see how we did that? We said punishment before, more punishment, more punishment. This punishment before is the history of the judges. We're now in history of the kings. Then, why is there this gap? Because of God's mercy, he gives them probationary time. What does probationary time look like? 490 years. You can add more and more information. So, if we can see that all of this history is in the history of the Judean kings, the question we have to ask, what does this chapter mean? And we need to decide what the original intent was and what the application is. So I'm suggesting if verse 34 is the culmination of all of this punishment from verse 18 onward, that was the original intent that God was talking about, which is the story of Judah, which is the story of Isaiah 28, if you like. So if that's the case, what are the Millerites doing? They're making an application. Now, if you're a regular Adventist, you're going to say the Millerites are doing foolishness. If you're in this movement, you're going to say the Millerites are making an application. And when you start making an application, can you start changing the original intent of a word? Yes. Are you allowed to do that? Yes or no?
No.
No? Because some people are saying no, some people are saying. I'm saying yes. Because you're going to change the original intent of 7, which is what that word was, which meant in the original, what does the word itself mean? 7. What does 7 mean? Complete. An oath. Perfection. It has all of these connotations. You take that word and you turn that word into intensity, because it doesn't mean intensity even in the original word. It doesn't mean that, does it? He's describing a type of a type of punishment. It's a complete punishment. It's a perfect punishment. It's a promise of a punishment. What else did we say? We said perfect, complete, an oath. God promises you that what he's about to do is going to be fulfilled. And if we can do all of that, we can turn it into duration. And we can say 7 times, the word times isn't there, and we're going to turn that word times into a year, 360, do 7 times 360. All application. Paul does similar things, doesn't he?
Yes.
Yeah? Paul does similar things. Alan White is going to turn a plant into a magazine that you put into a child's brain. I mean, how do you do that? It's all about application. So, more and more, what we're seeing is that we need to be skilled at identifying application and then making application and having the confidence that that's what we're doing and explain it in that way, rather than saying the original actually meant duration when it really never meant duration. Comments? Brother William?
I'm just okay.
You're just okay? You didn't look okay, that's why you look troubled.
No, I was trying to understand. I'm the one who didn't understand the question you asked, but I've got the person.
Okay? My brother?
Yeah, I will remember people who said A for duration, because the fact that it is in Daniel 4:16 contain duration element. The fact that 7 times passing over and exactly what was the duration. So that was why I said should be
Okay, so he took us to Daniel chapter 4, and I had a couple of hands up. What's the problem with doing that? Who has an answer to that? What's the problem? Because what did my brother just do? He proof text, and I've already warned about proof texting can be dangerous, but it's a legitimate. I don't want us to be scared of proof texting. Don't go away thinking that proof texting is bad. It's not. It's the rule that we use. It's the ultimate rule that we use, but we have to use it carefully. Who knows an answer to that problem? A simple answer. Context.
You have to understand a verse before you move to the next which of text.
Okay, so that's context. You have to understand the context. Now, if you go to Daniel 4 and it says 7 times, how many Hebrew words is that? Actually, I think it's in Hebrew. No, I think this might be in Aramaic. It's 2 words. There's one word here and there's another word here. It's 2 separate words. Are you double checking? Double check, make sure I'm right. 100% sure. It's 99% now. You get me nervous. It's 2 separate words, but in Leviticus, 7 times, it's only 1 word. Are you okay with that?
7.
What's the word 7? Sorry?
7 is Kibbutz.
Okay, I think it's in Aramaic. I don't think it's in Hebrew, Chaldean, but it's a near enough approximation. So these are the same words, and the word time.
What time is
I don't care about the. I mean, what does it mean? That not.
Okay, a year.
Okay, so it means a year. So that's where we get 7 years. Then we can do 7 years, day for year, 7 times. We can do this 25, 20, all of that kind of stuff here. But you can't do it in Leviticus. And this is the argument that the church uses against us. And we say, we don't care. We don't care about the grammar. We'll do what we want. That's kind of the argument that we use. And you have to ask yourself your question, is that reasonable? Is it reasonable to ignore what's obvious? And the reason we made that argument is because we didn't have a better argument. So now we've got a better argument. Now our argument is, sure, this is intensity, not duration. It's talking about kings. It's leading to this event. And what we're doing is we're making an application now, and we're going to end up coming to the same answer. In fact, when I say we make the application, the Millerites made the application. We didn't. We just borrowed their application. And what have we done with the 2520? We've turned it upside down, inside out, cut it to pieces. We've done lots of things with it. We turned 2,500 years into a key. How'd you do that? We've changed it in ways to explain what's happening in our history. So people are going to say, well, what gives you the authority to do that? I'm going to say, what gave the Millerites authority to do that? And if people are going to say, nobody, they were doing their own things, then you have to part way with people who come to those kind of conclusions. Because unless someone's willing to see that the Millerites were led by God, they were the angels of Revelation 14. Unless you're willing to see that, then you're not going to accept any of this. If you can't accept that angels led his mind, if you can't accept that William Miller was Moses, which makes him a prophet, if you can't see all of that to elevate this man up to prophet status, if you're not willing to do that, then all of these arguments don't mean anything. So if you label with someone and they're not willing to go that far, then you haven't got any ground to work with them or study with them. All of this would be meaningless. But there are plenty of people, if you give them reasonable answers and the Holy Spirit's leading them, working upon them, they would accept these truths.
So, I just want to understand when you say that by making an application you're changing the original intent, does that mean that we are ignoring or not acknowledging what is the original intent of the writer? What did that person mean?
So, the simple answer to that question, what he said was, if we're making an application, we're getting a statement, and I'll use the word twisting. Maybe you don't like that, maybe it sounds ugly. I'm going to take the word Sheba, depending how it's pronounced, in 26, Leviticus 26, which is a single word. I'm going to change it to 7 times, and I'm going to change 7 times into 7 years. I'm going to change 7 years, day for a year, to 7 times 360, which makes 2,500 years. So I'm going to get all of that to 2,500 years. It doesn't say that in the original. I'm going to get the word 7 and change it. So if I were to do that, does that mean I'm ignoring the original intent? And I'm saying no. The Millerites, I don't want to be harsh on them, because often they've got a lot of good ideas, but they're not as thorough as us. And the reason they're not as thorough as us, because they don't have all the light that we have. It's really easy for us. So when they go to do this, they don't do any of this that we're doing. I don't think they know that verse 18 is Manasseh. They say this is just a 25-20. We'll go to 677. So in some shape or form, they do pick up Manasseh, but not in the way that we do. So they do that application. Now when we come and we make an application, we should not ignore the original. If we're competent teachers, what we're supposed to do is first understand the original, then explain that we're making an application. So we would say, we're making an application here, or this is the original intent there. And if you go through the scriptures, no one does that. Ellen White doesn't do that. Paul doesn't do that. I don't know any prophets who say, let me first explain the original intent, then I'll explain the application that I'm making. They just state it as fact. When Paul says, I will make them a people who are not my people. Everybody familiar with that passage? Who are the people that Paul is talking about? The people who, this group of human beings who are not my people, now they've become my people. Who's he speaking about?
Gentiles.
He's speaking about the Gentiles. Where did he get that from? He got that from an Old Testament passage, and in the Old Testament passage, who was God speaking about when he said that? His own people. Paul didn't say, by the way, first of all, I'm borrowing an Old Testament passage, it's found in this book. Then, when God meant the Jews, I'm going to twist that and make it the Gentiles. He didn't say that. He stated it as fact. And if you read that, you'll say, that Old Testament passage means the Gentiles, and it doesn't. Contextually, it means his people. And therefore, we need to understand the deep spiritual significance of what Paul does when he twists that. And if you do what most Christians do, which is just say, he means Gentiles, you only get half the story. So in answer to Brother Robert's question, if you just make the application and don't understand the original intent, you're only going to get 50% of the information, maybe even less. And you won't learn what you're supposed to learn. You might come up with the right answers, that the Gentiles are now going to become part of God's people. You borrowed an Old Testament verse that said that, but that's only half the story. Because if you start talking about those who are not my people are now going to be my people, and made an application in the history of Paul, who's he speaking about also? Not just Gentiles, but who else? Who could make an application? Who are the people? Who are the ones who are not his people who now become his people? Ephesus. If if he said Ephesus, that means he understands at least what I'm seeing in that passage. What God is doing, he's raising the people in his church who are nobodies. We would call them the laity, not the leaders. They weren't his chosen people. His chosen people are Levi. Now he's going to choose Judah. You could do the same thing with Ephesus. A similar idea. So if you can see how Paul is using an Old Testament passage, turning them into Gentiles, if you also took the original concept and brought it into that history and made an application, then you can see that there's more light to understand. It's not just the Gentiles' light. Now you understand the struggle that's going on in God's church, Laodicea and Ephesus, or Levi and Judah. And Levi and Judah is going to take you to which Bible passage? Hebrews 7. And Hebrews 7 is about the priesthood. And now who are the priesthood? The disciples. This is Melchizedek. You begin to open a lot more truth when you do that. So if we were to do that, just in this simple story, 7 times 2,500 years, 677 brings you to 1844. Simple. But if you look at the original, which is intensity, this is Manasseh, Jehoiakim, King, and Zedekiah. You bring that into our history. This is not 2,500 years. This becomes much more significant. Now you've got 4 generations. The Millerites to us. You've got 4 progressive steps in our own history. Now these become events, 1989, 9/11, etc. You could never have understood any of that if it was duration. You have to see intensity. Tell me where you see duration from 1989 to 9/11 to whatever application you're going to make for these other ones. We're not doing that. We're saying this is intensity. Starts at the time of the end, and the rise of the king of the north begins to intensify. The struggle becomes worse. Can you see how we even use intensity in our reform line? Hopefully we can all see that. We're not marking duration. We're not saying it's 12 years from 1989 to 2001, 9/11, and making that some kind of 25-20. We use intensity. So, to answer his question, when we do that, we make an application, but if we can see the original intent and then make an application of that one as well, you'll see great light coming. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. Lord, we know that for those who believe these truths, that this reform line is the line of success. Therefore we see a manifestation of your power, that you are opening truths before the close of probation, so that as we enter into the close of probation, Lord, this movement will have got all of the things correct, that we will have made no mistakes. We thank you, Lord, as you're leading us as individuals in this small class and also as this movement. Please be with us and bless us, we pray, in Jesus' holy name. We also ask, Lord, for a special blessing upon the food that you've given for our needs. Amen.